What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name's Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. It's about 10:05 p.m. where I am right now, and today is April 10th, 2024. Just checking in for the people real quick. I have about an hour until I have to get back to work, back to classes. I do these live streams to educate myself, to chop it up with the people, to share enlightening information, and to talk about what I find interesting, particularly whatever is related to the fight against white supremacy, ending anti-blackness around the world, and also restorative justice for our people. And that includes reparations, something that I've covered on my channel extensively. And today we're going to be doing a global reparations check, checking on the movement. As we know, the movement in America is strong to get reparations for the descendants of American slaves, and we are still fighting for that. People are doing whatever they can with whatever they have available. Some people are using their time, their energy to be out there in the streets. Some are using their voice. Some are using their money to fund the movement. Whatever it takes to actually get this done, this is what we are trying to do. So I'm not going to spend too much time. Like I said, I'll only have about an hour, less than that, about 55 minutes until I have to get back to work. So I'm going to be chopping it up with y'all. As we know, we start every class or every live stream here with a map. And what we're looking at here is a map of the French colonial possessions of Africa. The time frame of when France controlled these nations varies. Tunisia was, I believe, the latest place that they conquered and had under their colonial control, and some of the others in Western Africa were held much longer, for hundreds of years to some extent. And it's only been recently, only within some people's grandparents' lifetime, that these colonies have ended. But still to this day, we have neocolonialism that happens in Africa, where many of these nations are exploited for their resources, whether that be minerals or also their people as well. And reparations should be paid to all of these African nations, to their people, and that sort of stuff. So we're starting here with the map of Western and Central Africa. Of course, the Democratic Republic of the Congo was not controlled by France directly. It was a colony of Belgium, more particularly or specifically of King Leopold, who literally owned the place as his own personal fiefdom. But many of these other nations, such as Mali, Senegal, Mauritania, Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, et cetera, as you see on the screen, were directly controlled by France. So because people really enjoyed the live stream I did covering Black French news a few weeks, I believe a few days ago, I'm going to be starting off here with this story about people in France fighting to make sure that the memory of what happened, the horrible human trafficking that happened in Africa and also across in the Caribbean, will not be forgotten. And so this information and the news will always be out there in people's minds. So we always have a right to fight for the claim of reparations. Now, I'm not from any of these nations. I am not from Haiti. I am not from Montserrat or Guadeloupe or Dominique or Martinique or St. Lucia or St. Vincent and the Grenadines or Tobago or Grenada or any of these places, right? All of these places are nations that exist today that are mostly black. And that's because of the rampant human trafficking. Think about that. The white supremacists were so evil, so malevolent in what they were doing, that now there are entire nations made up of the descendants of people who were captured, tortured, and enslaved in the Americas. There should be compensation to the descendants of those people who are now mostly living in dilapidated third world nations, and this needs to be fixed. So we're going to be covering this story here. Like I said, even though I am not from any of these nations, I support the reparations claim of each individual nation, each individual person who is descended from chattel slavery in the Americas, who is black. Continuing here, so French group works to break the silence on colonial slave trade. This was published on April 9th, 2024 for Reuters, but we are reading from VOA Africa. In this picture here, we have Pierre Guillaume des Princes, whose ancestors owned ships transporting enslaved people, and Diodone Boutrin, a descendant of enslaved Africans in Martinique, president of a group that campaigns on slavery and reparations in Nantes, France, March 23rd, 2024. I covered in a live stream a few days ago, no, not a few days ago, a few months ago actually, about a white man who tracked his lineage back to slave owners in Georgia and the toll that it took on his mind and that sort of stuff. And the thing is, a lot of white people have a lot of guilt, especially if they're from Western Europe and stuff like that. They have a lot of guilt related to what their ancestors did. And the way they process that guilt is through denial and saying that it wasn't so bad, as if slavery was something that was just a free ride to a whole new country where people got training and skills to learn how to be better productive workers workers for capitalism, or they try to say that there wasn't really that much involvement or that sort of stuff, right? But what we actually need to happen is we need white folks like Mr. Pierre here, and like the white man that I read about in the article on the live stream I did a few months ago that tracked his history of slavery to Georgia, right? We need white folks to be honest about that. Nobody hates white people. I know a lot of people hurl that at me, saying that I hate white people or that I despise white people or I'm some angry black man. No, what we need is restorative justice in this world to help not only black folks, but also white people as well. Because it's only going to take us working together to fix the wrongs of the past to move forward to a better future. Because until then, we're always going to have racial tension, we're going to have violence, we're going to have disparity in the world, oppression, and oppressors. So let's continue here in this article. This was published in Nantes, France. A group in Nantes, France, is working to break the silence around African slavery through education. Diodon Boutrine is a descendant of people enslaved in the Caribbean. Pierre Guillaume de Prince's ancestors from Nantes were ship owners transporting those enslaved. Although contrasting, their families' histories are linked. They met in 2021 in Nantes, which was France's largest port for transatlantic slavery, and have since been working together to raise awareness about the past and its legacy in today's society. Originally from the Caribbean island of Martinique, 59-year-old Boutrine moved to Nantes in the 1980s. It was only then that he fully learned about the true extent of slavery. From the 15th to the 19th century, at least 12.5 million Africans were kidnapped and forcibly transported by mostly European ships and sold into slavery. That's one of the saddest things about people from the Caribbean. As I've spoken before, my mother is from not the Caribbean. She's from Central America. She's from Belize. My father is from Alabama, right? I identify as a Black American. If people want to call me a tether, if people want to call me something like that, I don't mind. I don't care because I know what I stand on, and I advocate for all of our people, but particularly Black Americans, and I will not allow any disrespect about people from my lineage, Black American or people from Belize or any Black people, to ever be tolerated on my channel. But I want to say this: it's a shame that so many people in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Martinique, Haiti, whatever, maybe don't know the full extent of what happened. I feel like us as Black Americans, we forcibly teach ourselves about what happened to our people, teach our children about what happened to our people, not to pass on generational trauma, but to let us know where we came from, what fight we are up against, and how we have come so far, and how we can make a better world by learning from the past rather than ignoring it. Let's continue here into this story. So, researchers estimate at least 2 million people died in the grueling Middle Passage voyage across the Atlantic. France trafficked an estimated 1.3 million people to the Americas, including the Caribbean. The more I got into the story, the more anger there was, Boutrine said. So I decided to put all my energy into paying tribute to these men and women. Boutrine is the president of the Nantes-based Coq de Noman Fraternité. My French is horrible, but I hope y'all can read it on the screen yourself. An association that wants to break the silence around slavery through education. In 2001, France officially recognized transatlantic slavery as a crime against humanity. But according to the French Foundation for the Remembrance of Slavery, racism persists. Several cases of police using excessive force against Black people in recent years have highlighted accusations of systemic racism in the French police by human rights groups. Boutrine's association is raising funds to finish a 2018 project to build a replica of an 18th century ship that transported captive Africans enslaved by people such as Guillaume de Prince's ancestors. The replica will work as a learning center. I highly support this motive. I highly support this cause. We should recreate those slave ships. I'm not saying we need to put people on them, chain them up, and sail them across the Atlantic so they recognize the full horror of what happened to our people. But I do think putting it in front of people, I do believe that putting violence, pain, evil in people's faces is one of the best ways to educate people, not to traumatize them, but to actually make them learn from the past, right? This is why they still have the Holocaust memorials open. You can go to Auschwitz and still see the gas chambers. The Jews didn't just say, let's burn these down, let's get rid of them and forget about the past. They want the world to remember their past. We should make the world remember our past as well. So nothing like this happens to any other group of people. not just black people. Continuing here, students attend a guided tour with Pierre Guillaume de Prince and Diodone Boutrin at the Memorial to the Abolition of Slavery in Nantes, France, March 23rd, 2024. People will be able to understand the conditions the captives lived in, he said. Through the association, Boutrin joined forces with Guillaume de Prince, 83, to give guided tours that explore Nantes' links to slavery. One of the stops is the city's slavery memorial. Guillaume de Prince has always known his ancestors were involved in slavery as ship owners, but he made the decision to look deeper into the past in 2015. They are now encouraging other descendants to join a group they have created to continue what they have described as memory work. Very important. We need truth, reconciliation. We need our past not to be brushed aside, to be put in the back of the history book. It needs to be put front and center. It needs to be put front and center, not to make people feel guilty, not to make people feel bad about themselves, but to learn history. Because the only way that we can prevent history from repeating itself is by making people remember it. Seriously. Now, a part of me feels like that's a bit contradictory because right now, what's happening in Gaza, the one group of people are denying that they're committing genocide, even though they're doing the same exact acts that people against them about a century ago did to their groups of people. So maybe learning the past doesn't always make people act in the best way, but we have to at least try to keep that memory alive so we can always give those arguments against people who want to commit harm or oppression to other people in the future, so that we are armed and prepared mentally, because the fight against white supremacy is not a fight with fists, bombs, guns. It is a fight with words and ideas, period. All right. So continuing here. An ornamental mask referring to the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans is seen on a former Nantes ship owner's building in Nantes, France, March 25th, 2024. We have to remember that France, all of the European nations, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, the UK, whether they were involved in the transatlantic slave trade or not, all of European civilization is built on the human trafficking of people. All of these nations, all of these kingdoms got rich, filthy rich, off of the blood of people that look like me. Millions of years, not millions of years ago, millions of people, hundreds of years ago, were the lifeblood that created this civilization that now people see as the greatest in the world, that sees this place, that sees Europe, where I am right now, as the place that is the place to be, and that sort of stuff. This is where it all stems from. People who look like this, whose stories will never be told because they are forgotten and lost at sea and lost through the sands of time. Continuing here, I feared this would be forgotten, so I wanted to pass it down to my grandchildren. Guillaume de Prince said, "We will not solve issues of racism if the two, descendants of enslaved and enslavers, do not talk to each other." The movement for slavery reparations is gaining momentum worldwide, with Reuters revealing support was building among African and Caribbean nations for the creation of an international tribunal on atrocities committed during transatlantic slavery. And that's the end of the article here. Of course, no comments, because this didn't get pushed by the mainstream media. Nobody else is talking about this on YouTube. People are more busy worried about Cardi B's colorism comments, or Kai Cenat saying that Black Americans have no culture, or whatever the crazy thing Kanye is tweeting right now or posting on Instagram. But we should be talking about this. We should be talking about white folks and Black folks, recognizing that the fight against white supremacy is beneficial for both people, and recognizing our shared past that is tragic will recognizing that shared past, dealing with it, confronting with it, and having restorative justice and reparations for the people who suffered under that brutal system of chattel slavery. That is the only way we can create a better world for each other. Shout out to Pierre, the guy right here, and shout out to Boudon, Dion De Boudon right here, for working together on this project. Full support for them. Nelson Moreno jumped into the comments. He said, "I saw an article about this weeks ago. I wish I had sent you." Yeah, I'm a bit behind on all the articles because I'm sitting on so many articles here, but your boy is busy with English classes, writing for Culturalist Theory, doing movie reviews. I got like 20 million things to do, and I try to find as much time as I can, plus also getting some sleep in, getting my workouts in. But shout out to you, Nelson Moreno, for sending articles. I want more people to send me articles. I will react to them and talk about them as we go. Now, the title of this video is related to a big announcement that was swept under the rug. Nobody else is talking about this on YouTube. Everybody's talking about all the silly, goofy stuff out here, but nobody's talking about this big news. This guy right here, this pudgy, short-ish white man, standing right here, this is Antonio Guterres. Antonio Guterres is the Secretary General of the United Nations. He is the top guy at the United Nations. I believe he's from Portugal. And this guy here, the buck stops with him. His word is the mouthpiece of the United Nations. And what he said today, no, what he said on March 21st, pardon, because I meant to do this on March 21st, but your boy was busy, of course. He said that there should be reparations for black people, period. Descendants of the people who were colonized, the people who are the descendants of slaves, that should happen. Let's read his actual comments right here. Messages. Secretary General's message for 2024. Racism is an evil infecting countries and societies around the world, a deeply entrenched legacy of colonialism and enslavement. The results are devastating. Opportunities stolen, dignity denied, rights violated, lives taken, and lives destroyed. Racism is rife, but it impacts communities differently. The theme of this year's International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination highlights this, focusing on people of African descent, recognition, justice, and development. People of African descent face a unique history of systemic and institutionalized racism and profound challenges today. We must respond to that reality, learning from and building on the tireless advocacy of people of African descent. That includes governments advancing policies and other measures to eliminate racism against people of African descent, and tech firms urgently addressing racial bias and artificial intelligence. On this day, let's commit to work together to build a world of dignity, justice, and equal opportunity for every community everywhere. All right. So in this direct quote, he didn't say reparations. I might have jumped the gun a bit, but I do remember. Maybe it's on the other part of this website, and I will pull it up. I apologize right here, but still, he is speaking about anti-blackness and racism in a true and honest way. I wish there was a video for it. I wish this went into more detail and in depth. But yes, the fight against racial injustice. Another article where he talks about reparations here, but this is the same sentiment. So Nelson Moreno said he's Portuguese. He was such a good prime minister that the European Union invited him for a promotion back in the 2000s. Shout out to Antonio Guterres. He's a big dog, but nobody will ever top Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan is the trillest and the realest. He is the trillest and the realest out who was ever the UN Secretary General. All right. So gonna jump to this article right here, and I promise you, I feel embarrassed a bit that the quote didn't say that directly, but we will find it, and it is out there. The UN has been advocating for reparations for black people all across the world for some time now, but maybe that article just wasn't it. Maybe I pulled up the wrong one. Continuing here. Slavery Tribunal, Africa and Caribbean Unite on Reparations. This was written by Katarina Des Moines, published on April 6, 2024, originally on Reuters, but I don't like the Reuters layout, so I'm reading it for Straight Times right here. So support is building among African and Caribbean nations for the creation of an international tribunal on atrocities dating to the transatlantic trade of enslaved people, with the United States backing a United Nations panel at the heart of the effort. A tribunal modeled on other ad hoc courts, such as the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals after World War II, was proposed last year. It has gained traction within a broader slavery reparations movement, Reuters reporting based on interviews with a dozen people reveals. Formally recommended in June by the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, the idea of a special tribunal has been explored further at African and Caribbean regional bodies, said Eric Phillips, a vice chair of the Slavery Reparations Commission for the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM, which groups 15 member states. The scope of any tribunal has not been determined by the UN Forum, recommended in a preliminary report that it should address reparations for enslavement, apartheid, genocide, and colonialism. Okay, so yeah, that's where it is. That's where it is. So this is the part right here. The UN Forum recommended, they recommended that slavery, that a preliminary report should address reparations for enslavement, apartheid, genocide, and colonialism. So this is the part right here. There's more information out there on that. You can Google it yourself and look it up. Type in UN reparations for slavery, and you will find more info on that. Either way, I still think the articles I pulled up back up my point right here. Continuing, advocates, including within CARICOM and the African Union, AU, which groups 55 nations, are working to build wider backing for the idea among UN members, Phillips said. They recognize that establishing an international tribunal for slavery will not be easy. There are huge obstacles, said Martin Okuma Masiga, Secretary General of the African Judges and Jurists Forum, which is providing reparations related advice to the AU. Hurdles include obtaining the cooperation of nations involved in the trade of the enslaved people and the legal complexities of finding responsible parties and determining remedies. So, I hope that the tribunal, if it is created, doesn't just go after individuals, starts tracking down the descendants of people who are probably still very wealthy. In fact, I did a live stream talking about how the people who are the descendants of the enslavers are now kings, prime ministers, captains of industry, and that sort of stuff. I hope we don't just go after a few select people, but we attack the entire nations. Not attack physically, but attack them monetarily. We want compensation for the wrong and evil that was done. Going here to the comments, Nelson Moreno says, we talk about reparations from Euros, but we can't forget our fellow Africans that kidnapped us and sold us in exchange for guns and silk. I wonder if their descendants are still rich today. That's a very interesting question and a very interesting point, Nelson Moreno. I really hate when people bring up, the Africans sold us for, gold trinkets or manillas and that sort of stuff. Because what that is saying is that for some reason we are the people to blame for our own enslavement. And I don't see it that way. How the Europeans came into Africa and said, uh, you know, sell us people and that sort of stuff. First and foremost, the Africans didn't know that what they were creating was a whole racial caste system that will put us in permanent bondage for generations. That is a foreign concept to African slavery. I am not denying that slavery existed in Africa. What they had in Africa was more like fiefdoms, was more like serfdom in Europe. In Europe, for many centuries, people were bound to the land. They could not leave the land, and they had to pay tithes in food to the Lord who owned the land, right? That was very similar to Africa. In Africa, you had people who could not leave the land because the king owned it, and they could grow whatever crops they wanted on the land, but every few months they had to give up something to the king or the Lord or whatever, something like that. There were people who were technically slaves, meaning that they were owned by the people too, but it was not based on their lineage. So if a child was born, that child would be technically free. Moving forward, there was never anything based on race. There was never something that said only black people could be slaves, which is what the Europeans invented. A whole new concept. Only black people can be slaves. Some people might say the Arabs invented that as well, but the Arabs did also enslave other groups of people. But there was never anything in Islamic doctrine that said only black people could be slaves. There were people like Ibn Battuta, the Tunisian traveler and scholar and philosopher, who said that black people are inferior and are meant to be slaves in an Aristotelian type of way, like how Aristotle or Plato, one of those Greek philosophers, said that there are some people who are meant to be slaves. He wasn't referring to black people, but he was referring to other Greeks and that sort of stuff. But I'll just say this. I don't want to attack other Africans. Other Africans don't owe other black people reparations, because what happened when the colonialists came, bought people who were enslaved, what they did eventually was enslave the enslavers too. It wasn't like, okay, they just went to Nigeria, right, and said, okay, sell us your niggas, and then later they just left the Nigerians alone. No, they eventually enslaved all of Nigeria. They got colonized, they got whipped around, they got forced out of their resources, and their people were exploited and sometimes genocided as well. So I don't want to attack the Africans, because that's just putting blame on ourselves. But I wouldn't be surprised also if there were some people who are descendants of African enslavers who are still wealthy today, right? I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. But their wealth is incomparable to the wealth that was created by the Europeans. It's almost incomparable. If we go to Nigeria, is it the same standard of living as Spain? No, no. Of course, there were slaves in Nigeria, there were slaves in Ghana, there were slaves in Sierra Leone. But do they have the living standards of Portugal? No. Do they have the living standards of France? No. The wealth that was created in the Americas from slavery is millions of times greater than any wealth that was created from slavery in Africa. That's my opinion. But let us know what you think, Nelson Moreno, or anybody else who wants to jump on that topic. I need to do a live stream about that one day, talking about that issue. Should we be attacking Africans about, enslaving us? I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think it's a fair comparison. All right, continuing here. So These things happened many years ago, and historical records and evidence can be challenging to access and even verify, Akomo Masiga said. Unlike the Nuremberg trials, nobody directly involved in transatlantic slavery is alive today. Advocates for reparations say Western countries and institutions that continue to benefit from the wealth slavery generated should be held accountable, particularly given legacies of racial discrimination. A tribunal would help establish an official record of history, said Brian Kagoro, a Zimbabwean lawyer who has been advocating for reparations for more than 2 decades. Racism, impoverishment, and economic underdevelopment are linked to the long-standing consequences of transatlantic slavery from the United States to Europe and the African continent, according to UN studies. These legacies are alive and well, said Clive Lewis, a British Labour member of Parliament and a descendant of people enslaved in the Caribbean nation of Grenada. Black people live in poorer and more polluted areas. They have worse diets. They have worse educational outcomes because structural racism is embedded deep. The proposal for a tribunal was discussed in November at a reparations summit in Ghana, attended by African and Caribbean leaders, and ended with a commitment to explore judicial routes, including litigation options. Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria, is in favor of the push for a tribunal. Foreign Minister Yusuf Tugar said, saying the country would support the idea until it becomes a reality. In Grenada, where hundreds of thousands were enslaved, Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell is in full support, a spokesperson said. I like to see the Africans and the Caribbeans getting on code fully together. Now, I don't want to see this getting broken up. I don't want to see it getting broken up when they start, let's say the Europeans actually say, okay, we're going to give y'all money for real, but then they say, but the Africans are going to get more, or the Caribbean's going to get more. And then we start fighting amongst each other. I don't want to see that. Let's all stay on code. Let's try to go for the biggest dollar, the biggest bang, the biggest buck for the issues that were created by our enslavement. Let's keep it absolutely real. All right. Continuing here. Uh, so Phillips said the work to establish a tribunal would have to take place through the United Nations system and include conversations with countries including Portugal, Britain, France, Spain, Netherlands, and Denmark that were involved in trading enslaved people to the Caribbean and other regions. Among the tribunal's most vocal advocates is Justin Hansford, a Howard University law professor backed by the U.S. State Department to serve at the UN Forum. He said the idea will be discussed at the forum's third session starting April 16th, due to be attended by 50 or more nations. He said the goal was to garner enough support by 2025. The United States, which has financed the UN Forum, strongly supports the forum's work, a U.S. State Department spokesperson said. Now, I want to ask anybody out here, unfortunately, I still have a lot of right-wing people on my channel. I want to ask y'all, if you're black and you support reparations for our people, or you support restorative justice for our people, and we are sending UN ambassadors to the UN to advocate for reparations for black people in America and also globally, what do you think would happen if the right wing came into power? What do you think would happen if your boy Trump or any of the Republican nuts in the United States came into power? Do you think they would continue to support that reparations claim? Do you think they will continue to send ambassadors to be involved in the forum? Do you think that they would be advocating for this sort of measure to take place? No, hell no. This is why voting is important. This is why voting for the right candidates is important, and voting for our interests as black people is important. I know nobody likes to hear that. I know nobody likes to hear that, because we all just like to say stuff like, when Trump was in office, I had a bunch more money. Oh, stupid stuff like that. Even though the economy, the stock market, generally always does better under Democrats. You put your money in the SPY under a blue president, it's definitely going to go up. Trust me, my SPY returns have been 30% year on end. Come on, let's really talk about it. But what's Trump going to do? Trump is going to say, them niggas don't need no money. Trump is going to say, them boys don't need no money. The Republicans are adamantly against reparations. And even though the Democrats are not perfect, there is enough wiggle room with the Democrats to actually try to get that done. But then again, y'all are going to say Simon Hill, the Democratic shill. But I don't care. I don't care. I don't care what anybody calls me. I'm always going to say what I'm going to say. And I'm going to stand on my belief. And there is no hope for reparations for our people fighting white supremacy with the right-wing conservative nuts in America. None of that. None of that will happen if we do not get out there and actually fight against the right-wing conservative push in the United States. Because what happens in America, if we're able to get reparations in America, that's freedom for black people worldwide. That's reparations for black people worldwide. And we have to be involved in that. Nelson Moreno jumped into the comments. He said, seeing black people adopt right-wing xenophobia talking points is surreal and somewhat ignorant. I would like to know, Nelson, in your country, do they have black people that support the right wing in your country too? Let us know. In Portugal, do you have like the Portuguese version of Candace Owens? That would be insane. That would be absolutely insane. Let us know if that's actually going down. But yeah, let's continue here. All right. He said the idea will be discussed at the forum's third session starting April 16th, due to be attended by 50 or more nations. I wonder if that's April 16th this year. I would like to stay involved in that or stay up to date on that, and I'll try to report on that as soon as I can. I'm going to try to go live at least once every day, at least for an hour or so. Continuing, he said the goal was to garner enough support by 2025. The United States, which has financed the UN Forum, strongly supports the forum's work, a UN State Department spokesperson said. Regarding reparations, the complexity of the issue, legal challenges, and differing perspectives among Caribbean nations present significant challenges, the spokesperson said. The UN leadership has come out in support for reparations, which have been used in other circumstances to offset large moral and economic debts, such as the Japanese Americans interned by the United States during World War II, and to families of Holocaust survivors. Okay. So, yeah, the UN leadership has come out in support of reparations. I know earlier I kind of fumbled the bag when I talked about Antonio Guterres said they need reparations. I swear the quote is out there. I didn't find the right exact article, but here, the UN has said it before. They do support reparations for black people. This is big, major news, and we need to be behind this. Jump into the comments. Nelson Moreno said, absolutely, one of my brothers is racist against his own race. Ain't that a shame? Ain't that a shame? We need to kill that self-hate amongst our people. But we also need to understand that sometimes a lot of black people have a lot of self-hate because we're indoctrinated in a world of white supremacy where we see the faults in our people as something that we need to blame for ourselves. Now, I'm not saying that black people are perfect or that we are a monolith. In my country, in black America, in our culture, we do have some issues, but our issues are not so large that they are the reason why we are at the bottom of the socio-economic ladder, the reason why we get shot in the back by police, the reason why black women die more often giving birth to children. All of these factors have nothing to do with us as a people. We have no faults as a people. But white supremacy, because it is built on anti-blackness, some people will buy into anti-blackness even if they are black themselves, because that is what society teaches us. It ingrains in our minds. So I hope you're able to snap your brother out of it. And trust me, I have known plenty of black people who have self-hate in them. And all we can do is try to educate and advocate for our people and hopefully bring them back home. So, continuing here, we call for reparatory justice frameworks to help overcome generations of exclusion and discrimination. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, see, here it is. I found the quote. See, nobody can say I was lying. This is not clickbait. Now you know. Now you know. The title of this video is not clickbait because Antonio Guterres, Big Dick Antonio Guterres, the big Portuguese general of the UN, he said, we call for reparatory justice frameworks to help overcome generations of exclusion and discrimination. You might say that's double speak. You might say that's not being direct enough, but reparations is a variation of the word reparatory, which is the adjective, of reparations, which is the noun. And this is me proving that I'm an English teacher for anybody that doesn't believe me, though I might not be the best. All right, so that is the end of this article here. I actually got through all of these articles quicker than I thought I would. So if anybody has any questions or any comments that you want to say, leave it in the chat because I'm about to hop off and chill before I have to go back to work. But yeah, once again, I do think it is important for us to keep our eye out on what the reparations movement is, not only in our own countries, but also worldwide, and support people getting reparations from the countries or governments that oppress them. So, us in America, we're trying to get reparations from the United States government. If you're from Martinique, if you're from Tobago, if you're from Grenada, you should be trying to holler at France. The same with anybody from Africa. If you're from Nigeria, you need to holler at Britain. If you're from Senegal, you need to holler at France. And if you're from Mozambique or Angola, you need to holler at Portugal. And the crazy thing is, when we look at this map of French Africa, French colonialism, colonial Africa, this isn't even all of it, because we're not even seeing Madagascar, Mauritius, and other island nations on the eastern side of Africa right here. So this thing is big, it's worldwide. When we get reparations, I think a lot of French people might be hesitant or adamantly against it because they think it might bankrupt their nations. But think about this. They bankrupted the futures of millions of African children, of millions of African people from Chad, from the Central African Republic, from Cameroon, from Gabon, from Cote d'Ivoire, from Guinea, from Mali, from Burkina Faso, from Mauritania, from Algeria, from Morocco, from Tunisia. These are some of the richest places in the world. These should be the first world nations of the world. And the only reason we are living in a timeline where the places that have the least mineral resources, the places that have the least ability to grow agriculture and flourish, the places that have the least amount of human capital and dynamics in their people are the richest, is because they exploited the people who come from the lands where all the riches derive from. I'm talking to y'all on my iPhone right now. This iPhone right here would not be possible without the minerals that come from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where people are itching, itching and clawing gold and minerals and other diamonds and out from the soil with their bare hands. Children jumping into mines to make my iPhone and my computer and all the things that I'm talking to you with possible, right? This is the exploitation of the third world that we're living in, mostly on the backs of black people. To this day, there is still a form of neo-colonial slavery that is happening in Africa and the Caribbean. Where so many people from Africa are choosing to migrate to European nations because their nations back home have been so bankrupted by the neocolonialism that's happening today, and also as a consequence of the colonialism that happened in the past. But that's really all I got to say. Shout out to the UN. Shout out to Antonio Guterres for talking about reparatory justice. Yes, he did say that there should be reparations for slavery. Shout out to everybody in every nation who is fighting for this. My name is Simon Hill. Shout out to Nelson Moreno for jumping into the chat, and anybody who's been watching. More live streams coming. Send the articles my way. I will be reacting to them, and peace.